لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, the indiscriminately compassionate, the intimately loving. All praise is due to Allah. I bear witness and testimony to the oneness of Allah, to His magnificence, His omnipotence, His might, His glory, to His being the creator and sustainer of all things, the giver of life, the guider of hearts. And I bear witness that Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam is His final messenger, apostle, and prophet. May the peace and blessings be upon him, his family, his companions, and upon all those who choose to tread in his path until the last day. And we ask Allah that we be amongst them. Amma ba'd. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. We thank Allah, we praise Allah, we glorify Allah for allowing us to be here today, for giving us the opportunity to come together on this day. And we thank Him for allowing us to wake up this morning, because we realize that there were many individuals, many souls, many fathers and mothers, siblings, brothers, sisters, aunts, husbands, wives, who were not given that opportunity. They went to bed last night and they weren't able to wake up this morning. They went to bed last night in their homes with their families, and they were not given the opportunity to live in this day. So we thank Allah and we praise Allah for Him allowing us to wake up this morning, to be able to seize the day, to do good in this day. We ask that Allah allows us to do that, and that we do things that are pleasing to Him. And we gather here today because we realize and we understand that our religion, Islam, is not only about orthodoxy, it's also about orthopraxy. It's not only that we believe in the right things, but Islam calls us to do the right things as well. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us and given us and prescribed for us certain practices that we do repetitively to be a reminder for ourselves and to draw closer to Him. And that's why we pray 5 times a day at the very least. And we fast a month in the year at the very least. And we give our charity once a year at the very least. And we make pilgrimage, do Hajj, if we're given the opportunity and if we have the means once in a lifetime. And that's also why we congregate here today. So let us make our intention correct, that this is supposed to be a reminder, and that we ask that Allah allows us to come together and brings our hearts together on this day. As for what follows, I wanted to share something that I came across a few years ago and has stuck with me ever since. The American poet Ezra Pound, he is known to have said that he did not understand the force that was unleashed in the 7th century Arabian Peninsula that led to 1,000 mosques being built across Cordoba in Spain, until he saw it in the way that a man walked. A Muslim man walked in Tangier in 1913. This is a very powerful statement. It's a very profound thing to understand. Let's break down what he means. He says that he didn't understand the force that was unleashed in the 7th century of Arabia. What happened in the 7th century of Arabia? Our Prophet ﷺ was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to spread Islam and to spread the message, and he gave the Prophet ﷺ with the Quran. So Ezra Pound, this poet, this American poet, he didn't understand how that coming of the Prophet led to 1,000 masajid being built in Cordoba, Spain. Thousands hundreds of years later, thousands of miles away, until he saw it in the way that a Muslim man walked. This is a very powerful statement, that the way that this man walked was proof enough to the legacy of our Prophet ﷺ. But this man was a testament to what the Prophet ﷺ did thousands of years before. And if we think about this, the man reflected the legacy of our Prophet ﷺ. Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, one of the great scholars of our times, also known as Dr. T.J. Winter, he has a saying, he has what he calls a contention, that man is the proof of God, but the man of God is the proof of religion. And what this means is that all of us, we begin in the wombs of our mothers. And it's mitotic cell division at rapid rates, right? And then we're born, and we're born into babies who are helpless. We are unable to do anything for ourselves. We can't take care of ourselves. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to grow up, and He gives us free will, and He gives us consciousness, that we are able to understand the cosmos, and we're able to understand the world and the universe. And to an extent that we are able to put man on the moon. That is testament, and that is proof of God. That everyone nowadays, they're looking how to prove God's existence. All you have to look at is how profound it is to be alive and to be human, and this amazing creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. But Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad goes on to say that the man of God, the person of God, is the proof of religion. That if we want to prove the veracity and the truth of Islam, all we have to look at is a man of God. And our Prophet ﷺ was not only a man of God, he was not only a person of God, he was the man of God. He was a person who, because of him, we are here today. We are Muslim because of what the Prophet ﷺ did. And similarly, this man, over 100 years ago, just by the way he walked and carried himself, people realized, or this American poet particularly realized, how much of an effect the Prophet ﷺ had. And our mother Aisha, radiallahu anha, she said about our Prophet ﷺ that khuluquhu Quran, that his very character, his very being was Quran. That the Prophet ﷺ was a walking Quran. He was a walking light that was sent upon this earth. And throughout history, there have been examples, luminaries in our tradition, and scholars, and great people, and wali, awliya, friends of God, who have been the proofs of this religion. And the question that I have is, are we those people today? Are we those people that when people see us, they think, wow, that person is a person of God? And to be honest, I don't know if I see that. I don't know if I see people that others can look upon and gaze upon and think that this person is an embodiment of the prophetic character. And so, what I wanted to share today, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran that إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. That if we are unhappy with the state of the world that we are in right now, or we are unhappy with society, or we're even unhappy with ourselves, that's not Allah's job to change. He will change it if we take the steps to change it in ourselves. So going back to this man in Tangier, so many years ago, over 100 years ago, what we have to do is, what made him this person that when, just by the way he walked, this poet was marveling at him and realized the import of our Prophet ﷺ. And I think it's the fact that he walked with dignity. He walked with self-respect. He walked in a way that his character could be intuited from him. And I think that's what we need to do today. We need to start walking with some self-respect in a way that people will respect us, and walking in a way that we are reflections, that we are Khalifatullah fil ard, that we are caliphs, vicegerents of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon this earth. And this goes to the smallest of things. We need to start exercising. We need to be more physically fit. Our Prophet ﷺ said that the strong mu'min is better than the weak mu'min. That it's better for us. And we don't exercise and we're not fit out of vanity or because we want to show off to people, but so that we can reflect the prophetic character. That the Sahaba were people who they were able to take care of themselves and protect for themselves and earn for their families. That's why we need to start exercising. That's why we need to become strong, so that we are stronger and we have more concentration in our worship, in our prayer. And it goes beyond that. We need to start dressing better. And not because we want people to look at us and admire us, but because the Prophet ﷺ, he never left his house without his turban upon his head. And he never met dignitaries and people of importance without dressing well. He used to wear a Yemeni cloak and such, and wore nice clothes, even when he was coming to the masjid. And we don't do this out of vanity. We do it because we are respectable. Nowadays, we see people, and I'm not calling anyone out in particular, but you see people coming to the masjid wearing a t-shirt and jeans. 100 years ago in this country, t-shirts and jeans used to be considered underwear. Is that what we're, and America, the people in this society can go in the direction that they're going. They can dress like this. But I don't think Muslims should be dressing like this. I think we should be dressing with acceptable clothing in a good way. And if we want to just look at the most influential Muslim in American history, the only person we have to look at is Malcolm X. If we just look up pictures of him and look at how respectable he was and how well articulate he was and how he dressed and all the way that he carried himself. And I think we can see an example. So I'm not saying that we all have to wear turbans or even kufis, right? That's not what we have to do. But we have to start dressing in a way that's acceptable in the time that we live in this society. And I wanted to share a hadith with you with regards to change and changing ourselves and being better. I wanted to share a hadith that appears in the 40 hadith collection of Imam Nawawi. And one thing before I share this hadith is that we claim that we love our Prophet ﷺ. But how many of us, if we're asked, can quote a single hadith of his? Really? Like, we can quote every single Drake lyric, we can quote all these movies that are coming out, because whether we admit it or not, we love these things. We can quote the video game lines that we're playing, right? But we can't quote a single hadith of the Prophet. This is a tragedy. And I'm not questioning our love of the Prophet, but I think we have to start putting into practice. We have to start memorizing some of the hadith. We have to start being able to articulate what the Prophet ﷺ said. And a good place to start is the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi, his collection. So one of the hadith that appears in this collection, and it's a longer hadith, so I won't mention all of it, but the Prophet ﷺ recounts the story of a man who's in the desert, and he's disheveled, and he's having a hard time in this journey. And this man, he comes, and he's desperate, and he raises his hands, and he says, Ya Rab, Ya Rab. And the Prophet ﷺ says, وَمَطْعَمَهُ haram, وَمَشْرَبَهُ haram, وَمَلْبَسَهُ haram. That this person, his food is haram, and his drink is haram, and his clothes are haram, and he's nourished by the haram. And the Prophet ﷺ says, how can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this man's prayer? And we have to ask ourselves, is the food that we're eating haram? Is the clothing that we're wearing haram? We really have to start considering these things. And I'll speak more about the importance and the import of why this hadith is important in our modern time in the next part of the khutbah, inshallah. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. This hadith that the Prophet said about this man who raises his hands to make dua, and the Prophet questions whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can accept this man's dua, it should really hit us very hard. Because we have to stop thinking that the lifestyle that we lead comes at no cost. Because we have all these opportunities. We have these nice houses and these nice cars and this nice food and these nice clothes and all of these things. We have to stop thinking that none of this comes at a cost and that it doesn't come at the expense of someone else. And one thing that I want to share with you today that I came across a few years ago and it really impacted me profoundly is this understanding that most of the creature comforts and the luxuries that we have today, given the time that we live in and the society that we live in, it's coming at the expense of someone else. And one thing I want all of us to do here today, and I'm sure most of us have access to the internet, is go to a website, slaverycalculator.org. Slaverycalculator.org. most of us, we think that slavery ended with the Emancipation Proclamation when Abraham Lincoln gave that speech. But that's not the reality of the world we live in today. There are slaves today. We might not call them slaves, but they're wage slaves. They're people who are working at the expense of themselves to provide us the comforts that we have, to provide us everything that we have. And if you go to this website, Slavery Calculator, it gives you an algorithm. You plug in, what kind of car you drive, or what kind of food you eat, how many clothes you have, all of these things. And once you plug it in, it tells you how many people around the world are working for you in order for you to have the life that you have today, the lifestyle that you have today. And really, subhanAllah, it's so humbling. The average American, there are 63 slaves working for the average American to provide them the lifestyle that we have. And we have to look at ourselves. When I did this a few years ago, I plugged in all this information, and I was living with my parents, and very small means that still at the time, I had about 40 people that would be considered slaves. And over the past few years, I've been trying to improve, and now, alhamdulillah, I'm at around 20. But even then, that to me is too much. Even one person working at their own expense for my benefit is still too much. And the reality of the thing is, the reality of the world is that we won't be able to fix it all. But we have to try. We have to know that we will be accountable for these things. And we have to be able to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, Ya Allah, I wasn't able to fix everything. And I know that there was harm done because of the way I lived. But I tried my best. And we then ask Allah sincerely for His forgiveness. So the first step is actually just seeking forgiveness and making a commitment to change, whether we can or not. But I think this is our first step. And I would encourage all of you to go to this website, Slavery Calculator, and try to do the best they can in seeing how much they're exploiting others. Because this is something, if the Prophet ﷺ was here today, he would be against this. He would be against exploitation of other human beings, and we need to do the same. And the second thing I want to recommend to you is a book. And we have to start realizing that we don't only vote once every 4 years. We don't vote once every 2 years for our senators and our presidents. We vote every single day. That the money that we spend on the things that we do, when we give our money to these corporations or to these banks, they are doing things with our money. And they're using our money in a way that would not be acceptable to us if we knew them. So I want to recommend this book. It's called The Better World Shopping Guide. And Sheikh Hamza Yusuf has been mentioning this book since 2010, from the first time I heard it. It's called The Better World Shopping Guide. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to betterworldshopper.org. This book, most of us, we went through school and we had report cards, and we get report cards that say if you have an A or a B or a C. And if we went home with a 97%, our parents would ask us where the other 3% are, because they're not very content with even perfection. But what this man did, Dr. Ellis Jones, he took different fields, whether it's the dairy industry, the gasoline industry, the banks, all of these different things, and he ranked these companies for an A up to an F. The companies that are doing the worst in the world and destroying the environment and using exploited labor, and the companies that are doing good in communities and such. And we have to realize that when we go to a company, when we go to the store, and we buy a product, just because it's the cheapest product doesn't mean it's the best product. It's very likely that that product is as cheap as it is because it's coming at some kind of exploitation. And we have to make conscious decisions. We have to vote well with our money. We have to give money to people who are doing good. That when we have our money in banks like Wells Fargo, we have to stop thinking that they're just keeping the money and they're not doing anything with it. We have to realize that they're putting that money into the prison industrial complex and creating these prisons where these prisoners are working in inhumane conditions and all of these things. We have to realize that when we buy a product like Coca-Cola, it's coming at the expense of the environment. And if the Prophet ﷺ was here today, he would not stand for this. He would be the first person at the vanguard of making these decisions to be better. So I wanted to recommend this book. And we have to stop thinking that we won't be accountable for these things. And I really think that it's affecting us spiritually. If we take the threads on our clothing that we're wearing today, and we look at the history of where that started, and every step that clothing took to reach to us where we are today, if we knew the people that were exploited in that process, I don't know if we'd be willing to wear those clothes. And we're coming into the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're wearing these clothes, and we're eating this food that's coming at the expense of others. And we don't think that it's having an effect on us spiritually, that when we raise our hands to make dua, and we're not considering these things, that it's affecting us, I think that, I'm sure, inshallah, Allah is forgiving and He is accepting our prayers. But I know that if we start doing these things, if we start becoming more conscious human beings, then what we ask for will be increased. Our lifestyle will increase. When we start eating better food, healthier food, fair trade, organic food, these things, it'll benefit us. Because these things, I mean, really, it's such an important thing that we realize that not only does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have a right upon us, that when we pray, we do it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a right upon us, but society also has a right upon us. Our wives, our children, our parents, we have rights that we have to fulfill towards them. And additionally, we have rights towards our own bodies, and we have to take care of ourselves. So when we start thinking of these things, I think it's all encompassed by taqwa. God consciousness is also being conscious of other people. It's being conscious of the environment. It's being conscious of others. And if the Prophet ﷺ was here with us today, he would be at the forefront of these things. We need to start becoming agents of change. We have to stop thinking that these are not part of our Islam. Our Islam is holistic. It encompasses all of these things. And for us to be the best Muslims, we have to think beyond the masjid. This is something that Enlightenment period, hundreds of years ago, happened to the Christian world. They thought that they're going to separate their churches and their government, and their religion remain to the churches. So they go once a week, they come to their facilities, their mass, all of these things, and that's it. But that's not the case with us. We pray 5 times a day. We do these things. We don't just come to the masjid once in a week and that's it. Our Islam goes outside of the masjid. And so we need to take our Islam outside of the masjid, into our stores, into our schools, and all of these things. So I really implore and urge all of us, including myself first and foremost, to be the first person to make these changes, to ask that this is a way that we improve our Islam and our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and our relationship with this society and the people in this world. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us agents of change. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes it easy for us to do these things, that He educates us and grants us beneficial knowledge to be able to improve ourselves, improve our lives, improve our families, and do good in this world and good to others. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين وانفعنا بالقرآن وذكر الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا متقبلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا. اللهم أعذنا من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. اللهم أعوذ بك من الهم والحزن ونعوذ بك من العجز والكسل ونعوذ بك من الجبن والبخل ونعوذ بك من دلع الدين وغلبة الرجال. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. وقيم السلام.